Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. Hey, this week I want to talk about skeletons in the closet. Now, maybe you've heard of the Oddfellows, maybe you haven't. And I'm not talking about the movie, I'm talking about the independent order of Oddfellows. Now, if you don't know the story, let me give you the backstory on the Oddfellows. Founded in England in the 18th century, the Independent Order of Oddfellows was a fraternal organization. It was made up of men of good character, loyal to their country, and those who believed in a supreme being. It was a non-sectarian, non-political organization focused on good works. Now, today, the IOFF, as it's referred to, is one of the world's largest fraternal orders. It has over 10,000 lodges with roughly 600,000 members in over 26 countries. Now, again, this is a non-sectarian, non-political organization, so it's open to people of all races, genders, nationalities, and social statuses. Now, if we go back in history, the IOFF's origins can be traced back to the Old English trade guilds, very similar to the Masons, but they're two distinct organizations. This IOFF back history really was an opportunity for craftsmen of various trades to come together and to unite to do works of service to support their local communities. Now, the IOFF made its debut in the United States in 1819. Now, if you dig into the teachings of the International Order of Oddfellows, it's interesting. It's their core teachings are symbolized by some unique pictorial illustrations. First are three arrows. Those three arrows represent friendship, truth, and love. Also in the symbol of their core teachings is a bundle of sticks. The bundle of sticks represents concerted effort. Having a hard time with that word today. And there are also in the symbol of the Oddfellows three linked chains. Again, reminding the members that they are bound together in friendship, love, and truth. Now, I was recently in Northern California, and I was invited by a friend to meet him at a nondescript location in downtown Petaluma. If you've never been to Petaluma, California, it is a nostalgic little town not too far from the ocean. And when my friend reached out, he said, "John, I want to give you a tour of a building." He says, "I know you're a history buff, and because you love history, I think you'll appreciate what I want to show you." What he didn't tell me was he was a member of the Oddfellows. So on my arrival, I found myself standing in front of this large, massive building, probably more than 100, 150 years old. It was incredibly old, incredibly beautiful, but the door was locked. My friend, nowhere to be seen. I reached out and gave him a call on my cell phone, and he said, "I'll be right there." And after a few moments, he buzzed me in through the electronic locks on the door, and I was granted access into the building. I made my way up this incredibly tall, narrow staircase. When I got to the top, my friend meeting me there with a big smile, he said, "Welcome to the Oddfellows Lodge." And so I got a tour of this massive multi-story complex, and I was fascinated by all the history that was around me. There were photographs, there were documents, there were costumes. Many of these pictures and documents and costumes well over 100 years old. He took me into this incredible meeting hall that when I walked in the door, my mind immediately went to the Lara Croft Tomb Raider movie where she's walking in to meet with the Illuminati. Here were these incredibly ornately carved chairs, or as I would call them, thrones, that were neatly arranged on a small dais, a stage area, at the front of the hall, and it was an incredibly beautiful, moving sight to see. Now, like many fraternal organizations, there's rituals, and the Oddfellow Society is no different. But one of their unique rituals, and I actually got a chance to see this for myself, is the presence of at least one human skull in every lodge. Now, this lodge was no different, and it actually had a skeleton lying in a coffin, neatly tucked away in a closet, a literal skeleton in the closet. Now, my friend shared with me that according to the tradition of this lodge, this skeleton belonged to one of the older Odd Fellows members. who donated his body at death to the society so they could preserve the ritual of having at least one human skull, and in this point, an entire human cadaver, the bones of this individual preserved in a coffin for all of eternity. Now, why this? So I began to dig into what's the story behind the skeleton in the closet, or keeping a skull as part of the rituals. Well, many people believe that this tradition was adopted from a practice by doctors in 18th century Britain. Now, prior to an act of parliament in 1832, the doctors in Britain could only dissect the bodies of executed criminals. So as a result of that, skeletons were rare, and when you could get access to a body to dissect and to study, it was an extremely valuable opportunity. Now, because of social stigma, physicians were not allowed to retain or display a human skeleton from a dissected body. So what did they do? The ones that had the opportunity to get a hold of a body that they could actually perform and study with, they would store those skeletons in a closet, a cupboard, as they called it, hidden from human view. So think about it. Having a skeleton in a closet was a way for a doctor to secretly study human anatomy while avoiding unwanted scrutiny or the displeasure of the public around them. Now, over time, the phrase skeleton in a closet evolved to represent any concealed or potentially embarrassing or uncomfortable fact about someone that you wanted to keep to yourself. You know, for all of us, it's those uncomfortable moments in our lives that we want to keep to ourselves to avoid public scrutiny, to avoid embarrassment, or to avoid humiliation. But if we don't address the skeletons in our closet, there's a problem. And the problem is this: if we leave the skeletons in our closet unabated, unremoved, and they simply stay there, we remain shackled to yesterday. We remained imprisoned in the past and unable to move forward. Because every time we open the door to the closet, staring back at us is the skeleton of something embarrassing, something humiliating, something uncomfortable that we don't want to be shed the light of day upon. Now, interestingly enough, if we go back into the Bible and into the Jewish Torah, we read the story of Nimrod. Now, if you're not familiar with the story, Nimrod was the grandson of Noah. That is the Noah of Noah and the ark. Well, according to old Jewish tradition, Nimrod himself commissioned the building of the Tower of Babel as a place of refuge in the event of a global flood. You know, prior to learning this historic fact from Jewish tradition, I'd always wondered why the Tower of Babel was being built. It was a tower that was going to reach into the heavens, and having learned this recently from Jewish tradition, it makes sense. Nimrod, as the son of Noah, grew up listening to the stories of his parents and his grandparents who survived the flood inside the ark. Now, according to, again, Jewish tradition, this instilled such fear in Nimrod that he wanted to make sure in the event God flooded the earth again, he was prepared and he had a place to go that he could survive the floods and the waters. This fear of the flood became Nimrod's skeleton in the closet. Now, between 1933 and 1945, the Jewish people living in Europe experienced unspeakable horrors as a result of the Holocaust. Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany set out to exterminate the Jewish people, and over 6 million people lost their lives during this brutal dictatorship. Now, the survivor of these atrocities coming out of the concentration camps saw their fears and their anxieties passed down to their children and their grandchildren. Now, this is a phenomenon known as intergenerational trauma. And as I begin to read and study intergenerational trauma, it's interesting. The psychological effects of a traumatic experience such as the Holocaust can be passed down across generations, not only through oral tradition and through the stories told, but actually through epigenetic changes in genes. Even at the DNA level, changes take place that pass down traits that move from one generation to the next. And as a result of these epigenetic changes, the descendants of many of the Holocaust survivors were more susceptible to anxiety, and they had a heightened stress response. So it's important to note, both in the case of Nimrod and in the case of the survivors of the Holocaust, the past can be passed down. Some skeletons in the closet that you and I may have could be generational. But more often, and most often, the fact, those skeletons in the closet of our own making. We store those skeletons in the closet ourselves. Now, how do we do that? Well, think about life that you and I live every single day. As we go through life on this earth, we're all going to experience setbacks at some point in our lives. We're all going to have regrets. We're all going to have disappointments. We're all going to have past hurts that we're going to carry with us. You and I, we've all made bad choices at some point in our lives. And I can guarantee you at some point in our lives, if you haven't failed yet, you will. Every single one of us are going to experience failure at least once or twice in our lives. There's also going to be times for some of us when we're going to experience neglect, or we're going to be abused, or we're going to be abandoned, or we're going to go through broken relationships, financial mishaps, health issues. Other things happen as we go through life. How we respond to those moments, those negative, bad, hurtful, disappointing, humiliating moments, is going to determine whether that becomes a skeleton in a closet that we continue to revisit or we deal with it and move on. Because here's what you need to know. If we don't deal with these setbacks that we experience in life in the moment, and we don't put them behind us, those setbacks and the emotions that we experience as a result of that, they nestle into our psyche. And as they get into our thinking, they begin to manifest themselves in our lives as embarrassment, as shame, as insecurity, as humiliation, and often as limiting beliefs. And you and I all know from the teachings that I share every single week, it's limiting beliefs that hold us back from becoming all we were created to be. Now, when we fail to deal with the skeletons in the closet and we revisit those skeletons over and over again, our self-esteem and our confidence suffer as a result. We end up diminishing our own self-worth and the value that we see in ourselves. And if we leave those skeletons in the closet unchecked, not only do we want to hide it from ourselves, we want to make sure that others don't see the mistakes, the failures, and the issues that have happened, rather than being open and transparent with the world and dealing with the issues and learning from them. You know, the skeleton is there, hiding in the closet, even if you and I close the door and pretend it isn't there. Think about that. The skeletons that we create through the issues we fail to deal with in our lives, those skeletons are hiding in our closet. Even though we close the door and pretend they're not there, they're still there. And when we open the door, what's staring back at us? The skeletons in the closet. Now, words also create wounds. And words unchecked create feelings of inferiority, anger, resentment, and even revenge. When we allow those things to take place in our lives, inferiority, anger, resentment, revenge, other negative emotions like that, what happens? We imprison our thoughts in the past. We shackle ourselves to yesterday. When we continue to replay what other people said or did to us, what happens in here? What happens in our mind? We experience those same negative thoughts and emotions over and over again. We're replaying the past in the present and allowing that to predict the future. What have we done? We've shackled ourselves to yesterday, and as we're trying to move through today, we're dragging yesterday with us. And if something else happens, what do? We create another skeleton, we shackle ourselves to it, and the closet gets a little bit fuller with another skeleton taking up space. You know, think about it this way. You're about to go on a trip, and you've got to pack your suitcase to go. And when you open the closet, what do you see? There, staring back at you in the middle of the closet, are all of the skeletons that you've chosen to hold on to. You can't get to your clothes, your shoes, your coat, your hats, your belts, whatever it is you need to pack for this trip. You can't get to that stuff that you need until you pull all the skeletons out of the closet and neatly pack them up on the floor so you can actually get to what you truly need to go where you want to go. Now, think about the time and energy and effort you and I waste every single day dragging those skeletons out of the closet to get what we need, having stacked them on the floor, and then having to stuff them back in the closet after we've gotten what we need for the trip. How much energy and effort and time are we wasting dealing with the skeletons in our closet? You know, some people say they are so exhausted by dealing again and again with the skeletons in their closet that they're too tired to keep moving forward, and they just stop and settle for whatever life has given them up to this point. And other people, even worse for them. They open the door, they see all the skeletons staring back at them, and what do? They simply close the door and they simply sit down and choose no longer to live life. Do you understand the analogy that I'm sharing with you? And that poses a question. How much time, how much energy, and how much effort are we wasting every single day by dealing again and again and again with the skeletons in the closet? How many times are we going to open the door, get them out, pile them up neatly on the floor, get what we need in the back of the closet, and then stack those skeletons back in, again, taking time and energy, and as we're moving them, having to relive those negative experiences over and over again? Because every time we have to see those skeletons and move those skeletons and reposition those skeletons, we're revisiting the past hurts, past disappointments, and we're revisiting the failures in our lives. You know, to me, a better choice of action would be to clean out the closet, remove those skeletons from the closet once and for all, and find a nice little graveyard where those skeletons in the closet can be buried where they belong. But here's the challenge. We hold on to what we value. Now, think about what I just said. We hold on to what we value. So if we have a closet full of skeletons, what does that say that we value? Why then do we hold on to things if what we hold on to is what we value? Why do we hold on to the things that continue to hold us back? That's the issue of the skeleton in the closet. We're holding on to the very thing that's holding us back. But when we choose, when we make the conscious decision to hold on to past hurts, past fears, and anxiety, what are we doing? We are inviting the past to relentlessly pursue us in the present. It's like we've shackled ourselves to all of those skeletons in the closet and we're dragging them around, just like Morley in the immortal story of Scrooge is dragging his chains around throughout all eternity, forged one link at a time. And what have many of us done? We've linked the skeletons in our closet just like the links of a chain, and we drag them around with us everywhere we go, or we have to revisit them every day when we go to the closet to get what we need. But when we hold on to the skeletons in the closet and we choose to relive those past hurts, those past fears, those past anxieties, guess what we're going to get more of in the present? More of the same. Remember, what we focus our thoughts on, we focus our energy and our effort on as well. So when we continue to relive the past, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that we're going to experience more of those same hurts, disappointments, and failures in the future. You know, if we go back to the Bible and the Old Testament, and even in the writings of ancient Jewish culture, we read about a man by the name of Job. Now, Job was a man who suffered immeasurable tragedy in his life. Job said it well in Job chapter 3, verse 25. He said, "The thing I greatly feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened to me." Job's very words, and I want you to hear what he said. The thing I greatly feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened to me. What was Job doing? What he feared, what he continued to think upon, what he dreaded, the negative things he focused his attention on that he thought were going to happen, allowing fear to take over his life, those very things happened to him. He lost his home, he lost his property, he lost his children. Many of the things that he feared came upon him. Job's very words should serve as a cautionary warning to each and every one of us. And that warning is this. If you and I, if we shackle ourselves to yesterday's hurts, yesterday's fears, and yesterday's disappointments, we're going to invite our lives to revisit those same fears and disappointments and hurts and anxieties over and over again. Now, let me share a real life story of what I mean by unshackling yourself from the past. I love track and field. And when I was in junior high, I was a utility man on the track team. I never knew from week to week what events I was going to be involved in. Some weeks I was doing sprints. Some week I was doing long jump. Other weeks I was doing hurdles. Other weeks I was doing relay races. Other weeks I was running distance. So I trained in junior high and early on in high school in a variety of different modalities so that I could perform where I was asked to. Well, in junior high, I was training for the long jump competition, and I had actually had an opportunity to be invited to be part of the team that was going to go compete at the district meet. And we had an individual with us that was teaching us a new Olympic style of jumping, where as you would place your foot on the mat and you would throw yourself forward, you would throw your feet forward and your hands forward, reaching your hands towards your feet to get as much length as possible. And when you hit the ground, you would throw your hands forward in an attempt to not fall backward. Because in long jump, they measure the farthest point back in which you disturb the sand. So as I was working on this new technique, I ran down the runway, hit the mark, jumped, and as I threw my feet in the air and stretched my hands forward, I wrapped my hand around the cleat. And not realizing it, one of the spikes from the cleats pierced my hand and went straight into the cleat. Now, as I threw my hands forward when I hit the sand, I heard a ripping sensation. I thought I'd ripped my pants. What I didn't realize was that I had ripped my hand and I had severed muscle and nerves in the process. My hand was bleeding profusely from about a 2.5-inch gash, and I didn't even know it. I walked back and I got in the line and got ready to do my next run, and the guy in front of me says, "Oh my God, you're bleeding." And I looked down and my hand was a bloody mess. There were blood all over my pants, and I immediately was sent to the locker room to immerse my hand in some water and to wrap it with ice while I waited on my coach to take me to the emergency room. Well, my mom met us at the emergency room, and this is like the second or third time in the last few months I had been in the ER with some athletics-related injury, and it kind of became this comical thing. It's like, "Oh, Miss Terry, we're glad to see you again. It looks like your son's back." But anyway, it was kind of the story of my life in junior high. But Dr. King was there, and he was an entertaining ER physician, probably one of the funniest ER physicians I've ever met. He began to tell me about his own stories in track as he was putting my hand back together and sewing it up so that I had the opportunity to go back to school and the opportunity to go back to track practice. They wrapped my hand so that I could continue to practice and I could have the opportunity to go compete in the meet, even though my hand was bandaged and wrapped. But I dealt with a skeleton in the closet in the moment. Because when I walked back out onto the field, my mind immediately went to the stitches in my hand, the pain and agony I had felt as those nerves and all of the sensation began to come back in my hand and the pain that I'd experienced. Well, I chose at that point not to put on my cleats, but to practice and train in my tennis shoes. Well, if you've never put on cleats, they're incredibly light. It's almost as if you're wearing nothing on your feet. Tennis shoes weigh much, much more. And the more weight you have to carry through the air, the shorter the distance you're going to be able to jump. So as I began to train with my tennis shoes, I was taking precious inches off my jump again and again and again. And I kept jumping shorter and shorter and shorter distances. And by the time the meet got there, I had barely jumped far enough to have the opportunity to compete. My confidence in my ability was at an all-time low. Why? Because every time I ran down the runway, my foot hit that board and I propelled myself in the air, I was dragging a skeleton in the closet along with me. So I show up at the district meet and I'd got 3 attempts to make the finals. My first attempt in my tennis shoes was embarrassing. It was the worst jump of my career since I started learning to long jump. The second attempt, again in my tennis shoes, wasn't much better. The judge looked at me and he said, "Young man," he says, "you're going to have to make the jump of a lifetime to qualify. Do you want to try one more time?" At that moment, I had to make a decision. Only one opportunity remained, and the opportunity to advance to the finals was fading rapidly. So I had to make a choice. Do I leave the skeleton in my closet and do I allow the fear of the past to dictate what I'm going to do in the future and what I know I'm capable of doing? Or do I face my fear? Do I unshackle myself from yesterday? And do I do what I've been training for weeks and months to do? So, what did I do? With fear gripping in my throat, I took off my tennis shoes. I put on my cleats. I looked at my hand. I looked at my other hand as yet unmarred. And even as thoughts of me repeating the same mistake running through my head, I paused. I closed my eyes and I took a deep breath. I saw myself running down the runway, striking the jump point on the board where I needed to hit and throwing myself in the air. I took one more deep breath. I opened my eyes and I sprinted down the runway towards the jump point. My foot hit the board and I threw myself in the air. And as I hit the ground, I heard the judge yell out, "That's more like it, young man. Well done." I didn't know what I'd done, but I was excited. They measured my landing. It was my personal best of the year, the farthest I had ever jumped since I'd been training in the long jump. That to me was a satisfaction of knowing I had done my very best. Well, that was the good news. The bad news, I came up 2 inches short of making the championship round. I ended up in fourth place. The top three advanced. I was number four. But that day, I kicked that skeleton out of my closet. I unshackled myself from yesterday, and I freed myself from the prison of the past. I chose, through a conscious decision, not to remain trapped in my past. I was unshackled from yesterday's hurt and failure and went on to continue to compete and enjoy one of my best seasons ever. So let me leave you with this as I get ready to wrap up today's teaching. Here's a lesson I learned from my parents many, many years ago. How you view life is how you do life. Something my parents instilled in me many, many years ago is this: my perspective on life, my mindset, my outlook is going to directly shape my attitude and the actions I take in how I live my life. Now think about that. My perspective, my mindset, my outlook is going to directly shape the actions I take, and the actions I take are going to dictate the consequences I'm going to experience and my outcomes in life. So if I see life as positive, if I see it as full of opportunities, I'm much more likely to pursue and to achieve those opportunities staring me in the face every single day. But if, on the other hand, I choose to have a negative outlook, I choose to remain trapped in the past, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to focus on all the reasons I can't do something instead of all the reasons that I can. Now, that same perspective is not only true for me, it's true for you as well. Your perspective on life, your mindset, your outlook, all of those things directly shape your actions and how you are going to live life. Your perspective on life, your mindset, and your outlook are going to dictate the actions that you take and the outcomes that you experience. So if you see life as positive and full of opportunities, guess what? You're going to be more likely to see them and to pursue them and to achieve them. But if, on the other hand, your outlook is negative, you're focused on the skeletons in the closet, you're going to focus on all the reasons you can't do something rather than all the reasons you can. Now, the Oddfellows, for whatever reason, chose to keep their skeletons locked away in a closet. Physicians in the 18th century chose to do the same. Now, you've got a choice. You can be an oddfellow, you can be a doctor, and you can choose to keep your skeletons locked in the closet. Or you can choose to open the door and pitch those skeletons out of the closet, bury them in the graveyard of the past where they belong, and unshackle yourself from yesterday in the process. Those skeletons hanging out in your closet represent the very fears that are holding you hostage, the very fears that are preventing you from experiencing all that life has for you right now. Your potential is being diminished by the skeletons in your closet that are weighing you down. And when you choose to get rid of the skeletons in your closet and bury them in the graveyard of the past, you're going to unshackle yourself from yesterday and be free to pursue the amazing opportunities the future has in store for you. Let me leave you with this. You get to choose whether you're going to be defined by your past or prepared by your past. I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.